After 3 years of pouring my soul into the company, my husband's father, my boss, gave the promotion I had bled for to his niece, who had been working there for a mere 8 weeks. I submitted my resignation with a serene smile. "Congratulations to Sophia," I said. When my father-in-law saw my letter, he completely unraveled. "You can't be serious," he bellowed, his face flushing a deep crimson. Richard's voice echoed through the conference room as he lifted his champagne flute. "I'm absolutely delighted to announce our new regional director, my brilliant niece, Sophia Sterling." The room erupted into applause, but I was paralyzed. My hands remained motionless in my lap, a stark contrast to the enthusiastic clapping all around me. 8 weeks. Sophia had been with the company for exactly 8 weeks, and she was being handed the position I had been explicitly promised for 3 long years. I forced my lips into a shape that I prayed resembled a smile and brought my hands together in a slow, methodical clap. The sound was hollow, just like everything else in that moment. Richard's gaze met mine from across the long mahogany table, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, perhaps guilt, maybe defiance. Whatever it was, he quickly looked away. "Chloe has been such a fantastic mentor to Sophia already," he continued, his voice laced with that condescending tone I had come to utterly despise. "I know she'll continue to support our new director in any way she can." Support. The word left a sour taste in my mouth. 3 years of 60-hour work weeks. 3 years of missing anniversaries to finalize contracts. 3 years of putting my life on hold for a goal that was just yanked away. Now, I was expected to support someone else stepping into the role that was rightfully mine. Before we go any further, I want to thank you for being here and listening to stories that need to be told. If you believe that dedication and merit should always triumph over workplace politics and nepotism, please take a moment to subscribe. It costs nothing, and your support helps us share these narratives with more people who need to hear them. Now, let's see how this nightmare unraveled. Sophia stood up, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair shining under the recessed lighting, her designer suit looking crisp and impossibly expensive. She couldn't have been more than 27, fresh out of a prestigious business school with her MBA, and more importantly, her uncle's connections. "Thank you so much, Uncle Richard. I'm just so excited to learn from Chloe's expertise as we transition into this new phase." Learn from my expertise. Transition. The corporate buzzwords made my stomach clench. This wasn't a transition. It was a hostile takeover of my future. After the meeting finally concluded, I walked back to my office on legs that felt like they might give out from under me. The nameplate on my door still read, Chloe Maxwell, Senior Operations Manager. It felt like a monument to a lie. I had been publicly passed over, and every single person in that room was aware of it. Some shot me looks of genuine sympathy. Others meticulously avoided making eye contact, suddenly fascinated by the patterns on the carpet. Helen from accounting gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze as she passed, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Chloe." I shut my office door and sank into my chair, my eyes fixed on the wall where I'd proudly hung my Employee of the Year awards. 3 of them, 1 for each year of my tenure. A whole lot of good they did me now. My phone vibrated with a text from Leo, my husband. How did the announcement go? Is it official? I stared at the screen for a full minute before I could bring myself to type back, "We'll talk tonight." The rest of the day was a hazy performance of forced normalcy. I responded to emails, I approved reports, and I sat through meetings where I could feel the weight of pitying glances from all sides. By 5 o'clock, my jaw was physically aching from holding a fake smile in place. Just as I was packing my bag, Richard materialized in my doorway. "Chloe, have you got a moment?" "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. It was the very same chair he had sat in just 3 months prior, assuring me this promotion was a mere formality. He settled his large frame into the seat, his perfectly styled silver hair glinting under the fluorescent lights. "I understand today was difficult for you. Was it?" I kept my voice perfectly even, a mask of professionalism. "Look, you are incredibly valuable to this company. Sophia is going to need someone with your experience to guide her, to help her get up to speed. I'm hoping you'll consider taking on a senior advisory role. Train her to do my job," I thought. "Help her succeed in her new position," he corrected, as if reading my mind, but we both knew exactly what he meant. I leaned back, studying the man who had been my father-in-law for 8 years. I had always respected Richard, admired his business savvy, and felt grateful for the way he'd welcomed me into his family. But sitting there, watching him try to spin this profound betrayal into some kind of an opportunity, I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. "Richard, can I ask you something?" "Of course. 3 months ago, you told me this promotion was mine. You said I had earned it, that no one else was even in the running. What changed?" He shifted in his seat, his hands starting to fidget with his expensive watch. "Business needs have evolved. Sophia brings a fresh perspective, new energy, 8 weeks of fresh perspective versus 3 years of proven results," I countered, my voice still level. "Chloe, you're taking this much too personally." "Too personally?" I almost let out a laugh. "This is my career we're discussing. 3 years of my life. How else am I supposed to take it?" "Your family," he said, as if that single word explained and excused everything. "Family looks out for each other. Sophia needed this opportunity, and frankly, you're secure here. You don't need the promotion the way she does." And there it was. The raw, unvarnished truth. I was family, which meant I was expected to sacrifice my own ambitions for the benefit of others. I was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps were thrown my way, content in my role as dependable Chloe, the one who would always be there to clean up the messes. "I see," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I stood up and gathered my purse and coat. Well, I should be getting home. Leo's making dinner. Richard looked visibly relieved by the change of topic. "Give my son my love." "And Chloe? I truly do appreciate your understanding in all of this." I simply nodded and walked out, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor of the lobby. Understanding. That's what he called it when you just lie down and let someone drive a knife into your back. The drive home felt interminable. The rush hour traffic on the freeway gave me far too much time to think, replaying Richard's words, his casual dismissal of 3 years of my life, over and over in my head. Family looks out for each other. Apparently that principle didn't apply to me. By the time I turned into our driveway, the sun was a fiery orange on the horizon. Leo's car was in its usual spot, and a warm, inviting light glowed from the kitchen window. Home had always been my sanctuary, the one place I could drop the corporate armor and just be myself. But tonight, even that felt compromised. How could I walk in there and tell Leo that his own father had just sabotaged my career with a champagne toast and a patronizing smile? I sat in the car for another 5 minutes, just watching the neighborhood go about its evening routine. People walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, normal people living normal lives, completely oblivious to the fact that my own world had just been knocked completely off its axis. Tomorrow, I would have to go back into that office and pretend that everything was perfectly fine, I would have to mentor my replacement with grace, all while my spirit fractured a little more with each passing hour. But for tonight, I just needed to sit in the silence of my car and absorb the full, crushing weight of what had happened. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out what came next. Leo had already set the table when I finally made my way through the front door. The rich aroma of his signature lasagna filled the air, but for the first time I could remember, my stomach churned at the thought of food. He took one look at my face and his own fell. "Chloe, what is it?" He immediately pulled out a chair for me. "Sit. Tell me everything." And so I did. I recounted the whole humiliating ordeal, the champagne toast, Richard's casual dismissal of my years of hard work, the expectation that I would now train my own replacement. Leo's jaw grew tighter with every word, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his wine glass. "My dad actually said you were secure here so you didn't need the promotion?" His voice had a dangerous edge that I rarely ever heard. "Word for word," I confirmed, my own voice flat. Leo pushed his chair back from the table with a scrape, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm calling him, right now." "No," I said, reaching across the table to grab his wrist. "Don't. This isn't your fight, Leo. This one is mine." But the damage was already done. The conversation I had been dreading was over, and now Leo was seething with anger at his own father. Just another casualty of Richard's decision. The following morning, I walked into the office with that same fake smile plastered on my face, ready to begin what Richard had so delicately termed my mentoring role. Sophia bounced into my office at precisely 9 a.m., me armed with a color-coded planner and an infectious enthusiasm that made my teeth ache. "Chloe, I am so excited to get started. Uncle Richard says you know this department better than anyone." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Let's begin with the Peterson account. They're our biggest client, and they've been with us since before you were born." For the next 2 hours, I walked Sophia through our entire client management system, explaining the complex relationships I had painstakingly built, the specific preferences of each key contact, the delicate dance required to keep a multi-million-dollar account happy. She scribbled notes frantically, but her questions revealed just how profoundly out of her depth she was. So, when Mr. Peterson calls upset about a delivery delay, what do? You never promise something you can't deliver. You listen, you acknowledge his frustration, and then you give him a realistic timeline for a solution with a small buffer built in. But what if he threatens to take his business elsewhere? I paused, studying her perfectly made-up face. She genuinely had no clue what was at stake. Sophia, Peterson Industries accounts for nearly a third of our annual revenue. If we lose them because of poor handling, at least 40 people in this company will lose their jobs. That includes you. Her pen stopped moving. Oh, by lunch, my patience was worn to a thread. Every piece of knowledge I had spent years acquiring through trial and painful error, I was now expected to simply download into the brain of someone who had never even properly analyzed a quarterly report. But the true breaking point arrived during what was supposed to be my lunch break. I was in the break room, heating up some leftover soup, when I heard voices coming from Richard's office next door. The walls in this old building were notoriously thin, and Richard's booming voice carried effortlessly. "The transition is going flawlessly," he was saying. "Sophia is picking everything up so quickly. Are you sure Chloe is okay with all of this?" That was Sophia's voice, sounding younger and more uncertain. I moved closer to the wall, my soup completely forgotten. "Chloe has always been dependable, but we need someone with fresh ideas. Sophia, you are our future." Richard's words hit me like a bucket of ice water. She's good at following instructions, maintaining the status quo, but that's not what this company needs anymore. We need innovation, energy. You bring that. But she seems so knowledgeable, Sophia pressed. Some of the clients specifically ask for her by name. Richard let out a short, dismissive chuckle, a sound that made my stomach turn. That's precisely the problem. Chloe has become a crutch for our clients. They're too comfortable with her. We need to shake things up, get them used to dealing with someone who will challenge their thinking instead of just agreeing to everything they say. Challenge their thinking. I had spent 3 years building relationships founded on trust and unwavering reliability, and Richard saw that as a weakness. My carefully cultivated client relationships weren't assets, they were obstacles to his grand vision. What about her feelings? She worked so hard for this. Chloe's family. She'll understand that sometimes we have to make decisions that serve the greater good. Besides, he added, his voice dropping slightly, she's not going anywhere. Where else would she go at her age? She's 41, Sophia. Companies are looking for young talent, fresh blood. In a way, we're doing her a favor by keeping her on. At my age, 41 and apparently washed up. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, fighting a primal urge to storm into that office and tell Richard exactly what I thought of his greater good. I just feel bad, Sophia continued, her voice small. She's been so nice about training me, and I can tell she's hurt. That's because you have a good heart, but business isn't about feelings. Chloe will adapt. She always does. That's what makes her so valuable. She's predictable, reliable. She'll do whatever we ask because she doesn't have any other choice. Predictable, reliable, no other choice. I grabbed my soup, walked back to my office, and shut the door, my entire body shaking with a rage that was cold and sharp. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but the deep, calculating fury that settles into your bones and changes you fundamentally. For 3 years, I had believed I was building a meaningful career. I had thought my loyalty and my dedication actually mattered. But I was just a cog in the machine, keeping things running smoothly until the real leadership, the family, was ready to take over. Richard saw me as a placeholder, a babysitter for his clients until his precious niece was ready to step in. And the worst part of it all? He was right about one thing. I had been predictable. I had swallowed every slight, accepted every disappointment, and smiled through every humiliation because I truly believed it would all pay off in the end. But sitting there in my office, staring at my useless awards while Richard's words echoed in my ears, I realized something had irrevocably shifted inside me. I was not the same woman who had walked into this building this morning. The person who had spent 3 years desperately trying to prove her worth to people who would never, ever see it was gone for good. That afternoon, I continued training Sophia with the same detached professionalism, but inside, a new plan was taking shape. Every question she asked, every gap in her knowledge I filled, every client relationship I meticulously explained, I was documenting my own value. Not for Richard's benefit, but for my own. When 5 o'clock finally arrived, I packed up my belongings with a deliberate, icy calm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, I was sure. But tonight, I had some very serious thinking to do about my next move. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a cup of tea growing cold beside me. Leo was working late, which gave me the uninterrupted quiet I needed to do what had been brewing in my mind for the past 2 weeks. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before I started to type. Dear Richard, please accept this letter as my formal notice of resignation from my position as Senior Operations Manager at Sterling Corp. My final day of employment will be Friday, March 15th, providing the standard 2 weeks' notice. I want to thank you for the opportunities I have been given over the past 3 years. I have learned a great deal and am grateful for the experience. I wish the company continued success. Sincerely, Chloe Maxwell. It was short, professional, and utterly final. I read it over 3 times, and with each reading, a strange sense of peace washed over me. There was no anger in those words, no accusations, no emotional fireworks. Just a clean, dignified exit from a situation that had become unbearable. I printed the letter, signed it with my favorite pen, and slipped it into a crisp white envelope. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed, sleeping more soundly than I had in weeks. The next morning, I dressed with meticulous care. I chose my navy blue suit, the one that always made me feel like I could take on the world, and paired it with my grandmother's simple pearl earrings. This was going to be a day I would remember for the rest of my life, and I wanted to look the part. I arrived at the office early, before most people were even on their second cup of coffee, and placed the envelope squarely in the center of my desk. Then I went about my morning routine as if it were any other day. I answered emails, I reviewed the latest reports, and I even helped Tom from accounting with a tricky spreadsheet formula. At exactly 10 o'clock, I picked up the envelope and walked to Richard's office. His secretary, Marie, looked up with her usual kind smile. "Good morning, Chloe. He's just finishing up a call." "No rush," I said. "I'll wait." Marie had been Richard's gatekeeper for 15 years and had always been a friendly face. I wondered briefly if she'd miss our morning chats about her grandchildren. Probably not. She'd seen people come and go. Richard's door swung open and he emerged, looking flustered, his phone still glued to his ear. He waved me in while still talking about quarterly projections. I sat in the familiar chair across from his imposing desk and waited patiently. When he finally hung up, he looked at me with an air of barely concealed impatience. "What can I do for you, Chloe?" "I'm back to back until 3. I placed the envelope on his desk without saying a word. He stared at it, then at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What's this?" "Open it," I said calmly. Richard sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener, unfolded the single sheet of paper, and began to read. I watched his expression morph from mild curiosity to utter shock, and then to something approaching panic. His face cycled through a series of colors, from pale to flushed to a deep, blotchy red. "You can't be serious." The words exploded out of him as he shot to his feet, his chair rolling back and hitting the credenza behind him. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of negotiating tactic?" I remained seated, my hands folded calmly in my lap. "I'm completely serious. Chloe, we just promoted Sophia 2 weeks ago. You can't just abandon ship now. She needs your guidance, your expertise. The Peterson account alone." "She'll be fine," I cut in. "Sophia is very enthusiastic. I'm sure she'll figure it out." Richard started pacing behind his desk, raking his hands through his silver hair. "This is about the promotion, isn't it? Look, I know you're disappointed, but we can discuss other opportunities. A different title, perhaps. Additional responsibilities." "Richard, stop." He froze mid-pace. I had never used that tone with him before. Quiet, but absolute. "This isn't about the promotion anymore. This is about respect, and the fact that I've come to realize I don't have any of it here." "That's not true. You're valued, Chloe. Your family." I rose slowly from my chair, smoothing down my skirt. "No, I'm not. Family would have been honest with me. Family wouldn't have manipulated me into training my own replacement under false pretenses. And family certainly wouldn't describe me as predictable and reliable behind my back while discussing how I have no other options." Richard's face went completely white. "You heard that conversation." Every single word I confirmed. A heavy silence descended, thick with 3 years of unspoken truths. Richard sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "Chloe, please. Let's talk about this rationally. Whatever you think you heard, I understood perfectly," I said. I moved toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. "You were right about one thing, though. I have been predictable. I've spent 3 years making excuses for being overlooked, convincing myself that my loyalty would eventually be rewarded. But I'm done being predictable." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice suddenly desperate. "More money? A corner office? Just name it." I turned back to look at him one last time. "I want to work somewhere that values what I bring to the table, somewhere that sees my potential instead of my limitations, somewhere that doesn't think 41 is too old to have a fresh idea." Richard opened his mouth to say something, but I was already walking out the door. Marie looked up as I passed her desk, concern etched across her face. She had obviously heard Richard's raised voice. "Everything okay, dear?" I paused and gave her a real smile, the first one I'd had all day. "Everything's going to be just fine, Marie. You take care." Walking back to my office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The decision was made. The words were spoken. There was no going back. I had 2 weeks to wrap up my projects, document my processes, and say goodbye to a chapter of my life that had taught me more about myself than I'd ever expected to learn. The phone on my desk was already ringing when I sat down. Word traveled fast in an office like ours. I had a feeling the next 2 weeks were going to be very interesting indeed. But for the first time since that awful day in the conference room, I was genuinely excited about what came next. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reorganizing my home office. I had been officially unemployed for 2 weeks, spending my days polishing my resume, networking on LinkedIn, and trying to plot my next move. The number on the caller ID was unfamiliar, but an impulse made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail. "Chloe Maxwell. This is Eleanor Vance from Apex Dynamics. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Apex Dynamics was one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the region, legendary for its innovative culture and its strict policy of promoting from within based on merit alone. Not at all. "How can I help you?" I'll get straight to the point. "Your name came up in a conversation I had yesterday with Mr. Peterson. He spoke very highly of your work at Sterling Corp and strongly suggested we reach out." Mr. Peterson, of course. The client I had nurtured for 3 years, whose trust I had earned through countless late nights and weekend problem-solving sessions. I had wondered if he'd even notice I was gone. "That's very kind of him," I managed to say. "We have an opening for a regional operations director, overseeing 3 of our key departments and managing our largest client portfolios. Mr. Peterson seemed to think you'd be a perfect fit. Would you be interested in hearing more?" My heart began to pound. This wasn't just another job. It was the exact role I should have had at Sterling Corp, but bigger, better, and with a company that was on the rise. "I'd be very interested," I said, my voice filled with a newfound confidence. Within an hour, I had an email from Eleanor with the preliminary details, and my eyes widened as I read. The salary was 35% higher than what I'd been making. The benefits package included stock options, and the title, Regional Operations Director, was the very one I had been promised but never received. The interview process moved with breathtaking speed. Eleanor introduced me to the team leads I would be managing, all of whom seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of working together. The company culture was refreshingly direct and transparent. There were no hidden agendas, no family politics, just clear goals and open communication. During my final interview with the CEO, David Chen, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Why did you leave Sterling Corp?" Mr. Peterson mentioned you'd been there for several years and were a top performer. I had rehearsed my answer to this question, but sitting across from David, a man renowned for building his company on a foundation of merit, I decided on the unvarnished truth. I reached a professional ceiling that had nothing to do with my performance or my potential. I came to realize that loyalty without respect is just servitude. David nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We don't believe in ceilings here, Chloe. We believe in earned advancement and mutual respect. Does that sound like a place you could work?" "It sounds," I said with a smile, "like everything I've been looking for." 3 days later, Eleanor called with a formal offer that exceeded even my most optimistic hopes. As I read through the contract, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated excitement about going to work, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. My first day at Apex Dynamics was like stepping into a different dimension. The office was modern and bright, filled with collaborative spaces and technology that actually worked. But more importantly, from the moment I walked in, I felt welcomed as a valued colleague, not tolerated as a necessary burden. My second-in-command, Sarah, had been temporarily running operations and could have easily resented my arrival. Instead, she greeted me with a comprehensive briefing and a genuine eagerness to collaborate. "I've been looking forward to this," she said as we reviewed the quarterly projections. "Eleanor told me about your experience with large-scale client management. We've been struggling with the North Star account, and frankly, we could really use your expertise. Expertise, not dependability, not reliability. Expertise." The difference was profound. Within my first week, I was leading strategy meetings and making decisions that had an immediate, positive impact. When I suggested a complete overhaul of our client communication protocols, drawing on lessons I'd learned at Sterling Corp, David not only listened intently, but asked me to present the full proposal to the board. "You were doing this level of work for 3 years?" he asked me after my presentation. "And your previous employer never promoted you to a director level?" "Apparently," I said with a slight smile. "I was too predictable for leadership." David laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh. "Not at me," he clarified, "but at the sheer absurdity of it. Well, their loss is our gain. Predictability in results is exactly what we want in our leaders." The North Star account meeting was my first major test. They had been on the verge of leaving Apex for months, frustrated with communication issues and missed deadlines. I spent 2 solid days preparing, drawing on every client relationship skill I had honed over my career. The meeting lasted for 3 tense hours. By the end, not only had we retained their business, but they had agreed to expand their contract with us by 40%. "How did you do that?" Sarah asked in awe as we walked back to our department. "I just listened to what they actually needed," I explained, instead of telling them what I thought they should want. Then I showed them exactly how we could deliver it. Word of the North Star success spread through the company like wildfire. Suddenly, other department heads were seeking my input on their own challenging client situations. David started including me in executive-level strategy sessions. "You know," he said after one particularly productive meeting, "I'm starting to think we undervalued this position when we created it. Would you be interested in discussing expanded responsibilities?" Expanded responsibilities. At Sterling Corp, that phrase had always been code for more work with no additional recognition. Here, it felt like a genuine opportunity. By the end of my first month, I was managing not just operations, but also heading up a brand new client retention initiative. My team had grown from 12 people to 18, and our department's performance metrics were the highest they had been in 2 years. Every morning I walked into Apex Dynamics. I was reminded of what it felt like to be valued. My ideas weren't just heard, they were implemented. My experience wasn't just acknowledged, it was leveraged for the entire company's growth. The contrast with my old job was staggering. At Sterling Corp, I'd spent 3 years trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was disposable. At Apex Dynamics, my worth was a given, and the only focus was on how to best utilize my talents for our collective success. For the first time in my professional life, I understood what it truly meant to thrive. 3 months into my new role at Apex Dynamics, the industry grapevine began to deliver interesting news. At a quarterly networking event, I ran into Janet Mills from Pacific Financial, one of Sterling Corp's smaller clients. "Chloe, it's so good to see you," she said. "We heard you landed at Apex. We've been having the hardest time getting anyone at Sterling to return a call." I had always prided myself on same-day responses. The next piece of information came from an even more direct source. Mr. Peterson called me at Apex 2 weeks later. "Chloe, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I have a professional question, but I also wanted to give you a heads up." "Of course, Mr. Peterson. What's going on?" "We're likely ending our relationship with Sterling Corp at the end of the quarter." My stomach dropped. Peterson Industries was Sterling Corp's lifeline. Losing them would be catastrophic. "I'm sorry to hear that. May I ask what happened?" Mr. Peterson let out a heavy sigh. "Remember those monthly strategy calls we used to have, where you'd walk me through the projections and we'd adjust our approach?" "Of course." "Well, your replacement, Sophia, I believe? She missed our last 2 scheduled calls. When she finally got back to me, she couldn't answer the most basic questions. She just kept promising to get back to me with information, but the follow-ups never came." I closed my eyes, picturing Richard's face when he got this news. "The final straw was last week," he continued. "We had a major delivery crisis. Remember how you used to handle those? Drop everything, coordinate with logistics, keep us updated every hour until it was resolved." I remember. Sophia told us to file a complaint through the proper channels, and she'd look into it when she had time. "Chloe, we were talking about a $2 million shipment sitting in the wrong warehouse. She treated it like a paperwork problem." A complex mix of emotions washed over me. A grim satisfaction that my value was being proven, but also a genuine sadness for the company I had once cared so deeply about. "I'm sorry it came to that, Mr. Peterson. I know Richard valued your partnership." "That's the thing," he said, his voice hardening. "I don't think he did. When I called to speak with him directly about our concerns, he basically told me that Sophia represented the new direction of the company, and if we couldn't adapt to their new approach, then maybe we weren't the right fit anymore." My jaw nearly hit the floor. Richard had essentially dared his biggest client to leave rather than admit that promoting Sophia was a monumental mistake. "Anyway," Mr. Peterson continued, "I just wanted you to know our decision has nothing to do with you. In fact, that recommendation I gave Apex about hiring you? Best business advice I've given in years." After we hung up, I sat in my office, processing what I had just learned. Losing Peterson Industries would force Sterling Corp to lay off at least 15 people. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were people I had worked with for 3 years. My assistant knocked on my door. "Chloe, Eleanor Vance would like to see you when you have a moment." I found Eleanor in her office, a stack of industry reports on her desk. "Sit down, Chloe. I've been hearing some interesting things about your former employer." My heart sank. Was this somehow going to reflect poorly on me? "The Peterson account was a huge win for us," she continued. But it seems they're not the only Sterling Corp client looking for a new home. We've had 3 other companies reach out this week inquiring about our services. All of them specifically mentioned your name. Relief flooded through me. Really? It seems you left quite an impression. The question is, how do you want to handle this? These are significant opportunities, but I want to be sure we're approaching this ethically. I deeply appreciated Elena's consideration. I think as long as we're responding to genuine inquiries rather than actively poaching their clients, we're on solid ground. These companies have legitimate service issues that we are well equipped to solve. My thoughts exactly. Would you be comfortable leading the presentations for these potential new accounts? Absolutely. Over the next month, Apex Dynamics signed 4 new major clients, all of them former Sterling Corp accounts. Each presentation was a variation on the same theme. Companies frustrated with declining service, missed deadlines, and a complete lack of communication. The most difficult moment came when Helen from accounting, my old friend from Sterling, called me at home one evening. "Chloe, I hope you don't mind. I got your number from Leo." "Of course not, Helen. How are you?" "Honestly, scared. There are rumors of massive layoffs. The Peterson account is gone, and apparently several other major clients have left too." Her voice was shaky. "People are saying it's because you left." "I'm not blaming you," she said quickly. "We all saw how they treated you. I get it. But Chloe, some of us have been here for decades. We have mortgages, kids in college. If Sterling goes under..." The weight of the unintended consequences settled heavily on my shoulders. I had wanted Richard to recognize my value, but I never wanted good people to suffer for his arrogance. "Are you looking for other opportunities?" I asked gently. "At my age, who's going to hire a 58-year-old accountant?" I thought about Apex's rapid expansion, about the new positions we were creating. "Helen, can I give your contact information to Eleanor Vance? We're going to need experienced financial support as we continue to grow." The relief in her voice was a tangible thing. "Oh, Chloe, would you? That would be everything." After I hung up, I realized my perspective had shifted. This wasn't about the schadenfreude of watching Sterling Corp decline. It was about seeing good people find places where their contributions were actually valued. Richard's lesson was becoming painfully clear to the entire industry. When you prioritize connections over competence, you don't just lose one good employee, you lose the very foundation of your business. 6 months after Helen joined our team at Apex Dynamics, I received an invitation that stopped me in my tracks. It was printed on heavy, embossed cardstock, formal and elegant. "Richard Sterling requests the pleasure of your company at the Sterling Corporation Annual Awards Dinner." I stared at the invitation for a long time, trying to figure out what kind of game Richard was playing now. Leo found me in the kitchen that evening, turning the card over and over in my hands. "You're not actually thinking of going, are you?" he said, reading over my shoulder. "Actually," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I think I am." He looked at me, as if I'd just suggested we go swimming with sharks. "Chloe, why on earth would you put yourself through that?" "Because I'm not the same person who left that company. I'm curious to see who I've become." The dinner was held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, the same opulent venue where I'd attended these events for 3 years straight. But as I walked in that night, everything felt different. I wore a new dress, an emerald green silk that made me feel powerful and serene. More importantly, I carried myself differently. Eleanor had insisted on coming with me for moral support, though I suspected she was also just curious to see the company that had been foolish enough to let me go. The cocktail hour was as awkward as I'd anticipated. Former colleagues approached me with careful smiles and stilted conversation. Some seemed genuinely happy to see me thriving, while others just looked uncomfortable, as if my success was a direct commentary on their decision to stay. Tom from accounting cornered me by the bar. "Chloe, we all miss you. It just hasn't been the same." "How is everyone adjusting?" I asked diplomatically. Well, Helen landing that spot at Apex was a godsend for her. And honestly, it's inspired a few of us to start looking around too. Sometimes you don't realize you're settling until you watch someone else refuse to. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed, and Richard took the stage. He looked older than I remembered, his silver hair seeming thinner, his face more deeply lined. The confident, formidable business leader I'd once admired seemed diminished, smaller. "Welcome, everyone, to what has been a challenging but educational year for Sterling Corp," he began. "We've learned valuable lessons about adaptation, about the importance of strong leadership, and about recognizing talent wherever it may be found." His eyes found mine in the crowd, and for a long moment, neither of us looked away. The awards ceremony proceeded, but there was a forced, desperate quality to the whole affair, as if Richard were trying to conjure past success through sheer force of will. Then came the final award. "Our last award tonight is a new one," Richard announced. "The Excellence in Leadership recognition goes to someone who may no longer be with our company, but whose impact continues to shape how we do business. Chloe Maxwell, would you please come to the stage?" The room burst into applause, but I was frozen in my seat. Eleanor gave me a gentle nudge. "Go on. This is your moment." Walking to that stage felt like the longest journey of my life. Richard met me halfway, extending a heavy crystal award that glittered under the ballroom lights. "Chloe, your dedication to excellence and your commitment to our clients set a standard that continues to inspire us. While we are sorry you've moved on, we want to acknowledge the foundation you built here." I took the microphone, my hand steady, and looked out at the sea of faces. Some were smiling, others looked deeply uncomfortable, and a few, like Sophia sitting at the head table, looked utterly mortified. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and strong. "Working at Sterling Corp taught me many valuable lessons. Lessons about business, about relationships, and most importantly, about knowing your own worth." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I've learned that loyalty is a virtue, but it must be reciprocal. That hard work is essential, but only when it is seen, recognized, and valued. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do for your career is to walk away from situations that no longer serve your growth." The applause was more scattered this time, uncertain. "I'm grateful for my time here," I continued, "because it ultimately led me to where I am now, at a company that prizes merit over politics, where ideas are judged on their strength, not their source, and where potential is not limited by age or circumstance." I handed the microphone back to a stunned Richard, held up the award, and said, "Thank you for this." As I walked back to my table, the room was almost silent. Then Helen started clapping, slowly and deliberately. Tom joined in, then a few others throughout the room. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough. The message was clear. After the dinner, Richard approached our table as Eleanor and I were preparing to leave. "Chloe, a word?" Eleanor excused herself, leaving Richard and me alone for the first time since my resignation. "That was quite a speech," he said, his tone unreadable. "It was honest," I replied. "I suppose I deserved that." He looked tired, defeated. "You know, we're restructuring the leadership team. If you ever wanted to come back, Richard, stop." I stood up, meeting his gaze directly. 6 months ago, I might have been interested in proving something to you, But tonight, I realized I don't need to prove anything to anyone but myself. The company is struggling without you. The company is struggling, I corrected him gently, because you made decisions based on family ties instead of business sense. That is no longer my problem to solve. I picked up my purse and the Crystal Award, which felt surprisingly heavy. I do hope things work out for Sterling Corporation. I truly do. But my chapter here is closed. Walking out of that ballroom, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The scared, overlooked woman who had once desperately craved Richard's approval was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her own value and wasn't afraid to demand it. Eleanor linked her arm through mine as we reached the valet. So, how does it feel to have the last word? I smiled, a genuine happy smile. It feels, I said, like freedom. That night, I placed the Crystal Award on my bookshelf right next to a photo from my first day at Apex Dynamics. Two symbols of the same journey, one representing a past I had survived, the other a future I was building. The woman in that photo was confident, valued, and unafraid to take up space in the world. She was everything I had always had the potential to be, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. And I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply becoming the person you were always meant to be. If this story of workplace justice had you cheering, make sure to hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Chloe delivered that powerful speech at the awards dinner, showing Richard and everyone else exactly what they had lost. What was your favorite moment? Let me know in the comments below. And don't miss out on more empowering stories like this one. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.